There's a subtle curve in life that most people never notice. It's not drawn on any map, taught in schools, marked on calendars, or shared through family wisdom. Yet one day, often around the age of 60, it quietly appears and everything begins to shift. On the surface, not much seems different. The body slows a little, days grow quieter, emotions settle. But beneath it all, something within begins to turn. It's not a dramatic change, but a gentle reorientation of the soul. The drive to impress fades. The urge to prove something to the world softens. Even lifelong ambitions start to feel less urgent. It's as if the inner compass has found a new direction, quieter but truer. The soul begins to move backward, not in retreat, but in quiet return. It's a symbolic journey, as if it's searching for something lost in the rush of living, buried beneath haste, hidden in the silence of unspoken sacrifices, tucked into the empty spaces we avoided for years. Carl Jung once said, "The first half of life is for building the ego, the second for returning to the soul." That return is rarely gentle. By the time we reach 60, the soul has little tolerance left for illusion. It sheds masks, rejects pretense, and grows impatient with anything inauthentic. It begins to insist on truth. And often that truth is hard to face, because sometimes it reveals that much of what we lived was simply a way to survive.
Around the age of 60, many people begin to feel a quiet sense of distance, like the life that once felt so full now looks more like a performance. Everything might seem stable on the outside, but inside there's a different kind of tiredness. It's not physical exhaustion, it's deeper. It's not depression either. It's clarity. It's the soul gently saying, it's time to turn inward. Stop searching out there for what can only be found within. During this time, people often start to look back on their lives, their story, marriage, children, work, decisions, and even old wounds. But the past doesn't return to cause pain. It comes back to be understood, to be accepted, to become part of a larger whole. By 60, the soul begins to long for wholeness. It no longer chases titles, cars, or a younger body. Instead, it craves silence, peace, and the quiet reassurance that beauty still exists, that meaning is still possible, that something essential is still waiting to be found. This is a time of deep inner cleansing, a time to open the hidden drawers of the heart, to let go of old fears passed down through generations, to forgive those who didn't know how to love well, and to release the constant need to be strong. It's a time to finally face the mirror and see yourself clearly. No masks, no roles, no lies. Just the truth of who you are. Those who step through this gate with courage discover something rare. The soul doesn't grow old. It simply returns to its truest form. And what once felt like an ending quietly becomes the beginning of a new kind of life. One that's deeper, lighter, and more honest.
This is the quiet secret no one teaches, the curve no one points to. But those who learn to listen to their own soul find that it leads them home. Some call this stage maturity, others call it aging, but what it really is goes beyond words. At 60, the body may begin to slow down, but in the soul, something quietly speeds up. It's as if everything that was once postponed now steps forward, asking to be seen. The unfinished parts of life begin to whisper, "Now is the time." What's strange is that this shift doesn't show on the outside. It happens somewhere invisible. One day, without warning, you wake up and realize certain clothes no longer feel like you. Some conversations seem empty. Even the things you once took pride in now feel heavy, like they no longer belong. The soul starts to ask questions. What still moves me? What part of me hasn't been touched by what others expect? What would I do if I didn't have to please anyone anymore? These questions don't come by chance. They are like seeds, beginning a new cycle. At 60, time stops being about how much is left and becomes about how meaningful each moment is. The urgency no longer comes from outside, it comes from the soul. Carl Jung believed that after a life of adapting and striving, the mind looks to bring itself back together. This only happens when we make room to face what we've forgotten. He called this the shadow. The shadow isn't bad. It's simply the parts of our story we left out, the things we couldn't live, the dreams we set aside to fit in, the wounded child inside, and the quiet intuition we ignored.
At 60, all those parts of us begin to rise again, not as burdens, but as new possibilities. It's common at this time to feel a sudden urge to change direction, to go back to school, leave toxic relationships, or start fresh where it once felt too late. Why? Because the soul doesn't follow the clock. It listens to its own inner call. When the soul realizes that despite all the struggles, it's still alive, it wants to try again. It wants to live the rest of life without pretending. That's why so many women begin to truly blossom at this age. They stop apologizing. They stop softening their strength. They stop asking permission simply to be themselves. The beauty that comes at 60 isn't about looks. It's about freedom, truth, and wholeness. It's a beauty that can unsettle those who still live on the surface because it's too real, too quiet, and too authentic. And those who carry this new freedom no longer feel the need to prove anything. Maybe deep inside you've already sensed this turning point arriving, that you don't recognize yourself in your old roles anymore, that there's a strong pull to go deeper, to care about what really matters, to say no without guilt, to say yes with your whole heart. This impulse isn't selfish. It's an awakening, a fresh start, a new chapter where you stop living for others and begin living from within yourself. Those who meet this moment with courage find something rare, the peace of simply being who they are without fear, because their soul is finally free to breathe in its own rhythm. There's something few people say out loud, but many feel when they reach this stage of life. The realization that they've spent most of their years living for others, for the children, the partner, the family, the work, the social duties. All of it took up so much space that now there's a strange emptiness, a room left unoccupied.
And it's in that very space that the soul begins to stir. It no longer wants to be useful, it wants to be real. In a world that worships productivity, this might seem odd, but the soul isn't here to produce, it's here to be whole. And at 60, it seems to whisper, I've followed every command. Now it's my turn. This shift in values can feel scary, mostly because no one really prepares you for it. Society often shows aging as a time of decline, but Carl Jung saw something very different. For him, this stage was the richest, the most symbolic, full of real potential. Because now the ego begins to loosen its grip, pride fades, and time starts to reveal what was always there beneath the surface. It's common during this phase for old memories to come back strongly,
childhood moments, important people, places full of longing. But this isn't just nostalgia. It's a sign the soul is sorting through its stories. It wants to understand what still hurts, what's still unanswered, and what continues to live inside. For this, the soul asks for silence. It doesn't shout, it sighs, it exhales. It whispers between the moments of daily life. In recurring dreams, unexpected feelings, and deep, unspoken longings, you begin to notice that some people no longer fit, some opinions no longer matter, and some wounds no longer define you. It's as if the soul is claiming its freedom, saying, "I'm in charge now." But to hear it, you need to listen. Listen to the sadness that comes without a clear cause, to the body that asks for more rest, to the boredom that settles where excitement once was. All of these are signs of something quietly changing inside. This change isn't just on the surface, it's deep and structural. It breaks down old images, dissolves familiar roles, and forces you to face something you may have avoided your whole life, your own truth. At this turning point, many people discover spirituality, not as a set of beliefs, but as a lived experience, a state of presence, a deep inner awareness. Carl Jung once said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming conscious of their own darkness. At 60, those words take on a new and powerful meaning.
At this stage, darkness is no longer the enemy. It becomes a threshold, a kind of womb where something new begins to grow. What once felt like loneliness slowly reveals itself as a meeting with the essential, with what has always been quietly waiting to be embraced. It's fascinating how, at 60, even the meaning of words can change. Time, for example, no longer means rushing. It comes to mean presence. You stop counting your days by what you've done and start feeling them through the depth of each moment, the truth in every gesture, the peace that lives in the spaces between. Love changes too at 60. It stops being about expectations or fantasies and becomes a conscious choice. You no longer love to complete something, you love to accompany. Love doesn't need to be shown off. It becomes shared silence, a look that understands, a presence that respects space. Fear, on the other hand, loses its hold. You've seen too much to be scared by small things. You've fallen and gotten back up so many times that fear turns into a quiet reminder of your strength. At 60, there's a kind of wisdom that can't be put into words, a clarity that doesn't come from books, but from scars, a knowing that lives in your body, speaks through your eyes, and flows naturally. And that's exactly why this kind of wisdom can unsettle people. It challenges those still caught in the drama of the ego, those who mistake worth for appearance, who think youth equals power, without realizing that a ripened soul is fertile ground for true creation, because at this stage of life, the most beautiful things begin to surface, the deepest stories, the most honest advice, the pauses that bring healing. But only what has the courage to die can be born anew. At 60, many things need to let go. The need for approval, the illusion of control, the habit of trying to save everyone, the pressure to be perfect. And when these things die, something remarkable happens. You start to breathe differently. It's as if, after years of tightness, the soul finally opens a window. From this inner place, everything feels more alive, more sensitive, more real. That's why many people at this stage feel a deep urge to write, to paint, to walk alone, to study again, to meditate, to travel, not just to see new places, but to experience themselves in new ways. The soul longs to express itself. It wants to break free from its limits. It wants to be seen, not for others, but for itself. Every step on this journey is a form of healing, a healing that doesn't come from medicine, but from making peace with your own time. You no longer want to run back into the past or rush toward the future. You just want to be fully here, fully present. And that is the most beautiful kind of wisdom, to live in the now with all that you are, without hiding, without apologizing for how long it took, and without asking permission to begin again. There is an inner season that only blooms after 60. It's not like the spring of youth, rushed and full of promises. This spring is quieter, more mature, grown from roots that have weathered many storms. And when it blooms with truth. This season moves to a different rhythm. It doesn't demand much from the body, but it asks a lot from the soul. It invites you to revisit the quiet agreements you made with yourself, the silenced words, the painful compromises, and the childhood promises you once saw in the mirror. It's a time to make peace with your own story. But unlike before, there's no blame now. There's compassion. You no longer scold yourself for past mistakes. Instead, you accept them, understand them, and hold your former selves with the tenderness of someone who knows they did the best they could with what they had. This understanding isn't passive, it's freeing. Only those who truly forgive themselves can move forward lightly. And at 60, lightness becomes urgent. Not a shallow kind of lightness that denies pain, but a conscious lightness that recognizes the pain is there, but no longer controls you. The longing still exists, but it no longer weighs you down. The absence still lingers, but it no longer stops you. Jung called this process late individuation. It's as if the soul, after years of adapting to the world, finally says, "Now I want to find myself." This discovery is the most beautiful of all, because it is quiet, deep, and true. It needs no audience, no approval, no explanation. It is simply a return. At 60, this return shows itself in small moments. A walk without a destination, a book that brings tears, an old song that stirs forgotten memories, a sunset that suddenly feels new, a reconnection with someone who has long lived inside you. The soul becomes touched by simple things, not because it's fragile, but because it's finally unguarded, no longer armored, no longer afraid to feel. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is refined strength, the result of everything that has been lived through, overcome, and deeply felt. At the same time, it opens the door to a rare kind of wisdom, the kind that doesn't try to teach, but to inspire. By 60, you no longer need to convince anyone. You simply live in truth, with dignity and presence. And that presence touches those around you, your children, grandchildren, friends, even strangers. Because when the soul is whole, it lights up everything nearby. There's a kind of beauty that only appears when the rush is gone. It shows in the lines on the face, the pauses between words, the eyes that have seen a lot but can still be moved. It's a beauty without makeup, without filters, without effort, and for that reason, it's the rarest kind. This beauty doesn't shout, it gently radiates. It doesn't demand attention, it simply remains. Those who carry it often don't even notice, because they spend so much of their lives trying to fit into standards that never recognized their true light. But at 60, this kind of beauty begins to rise. It shows up when you stop fighting against time, when you stop seeking validation in other people's reflections, when you realize that your story, with all its pain and all its choices, is something to be celebrated.
This beauty is found in the woman who walks alone, yet never feels lonely. In the man who cries quietly and knows that's not weakness. In the voice that stays silent without losing its truth. In decisions made without needing to explain. In love that asks for nothing in return. At this stage, the soul begins to speak its own language, and that language is presence. You start to truly feel what it means to be here. You begin to notice the difference between just hearing and listening with your heart, between talking and saying something that really matters. Relationships change too. You naturally move away from what drains you and draw closer to what nourishes you. And when you're alone, you realize you've learned to enjoy your own company. That is freedom. When solitude no longer feels like absence, but becomes the presence of self. When silence isn't uncomfortable, but a place of refuge. When time isn't something to count, but becomes space. A space to breathe, to remember, to feel, and to exist more lightly. At 60, you realize you no longer need to explain yourself. You simply are. Those who truly see you will stay, and those who don't will leave. But that no longer hurts because you understand that a soul can only be recognized by another awakened soul. In that quiet, wordless recognition lies the truest connection. A connection that doesn't bind, demand, or control. It simply allows. Like a meeting between mirrors, a dance and silence, or the certainty that, despite everything, a life of wholeness is still possible. When the soul changes direction, everything that was hidden begins to rise, sometimes like a gentle breeze, sometimes like an inner tremor. But it always comes with an invitation. Be who you are at last, without fear. And that requires letting go. Letting go of old versions of yourself, the stories others told about you, the need to be useful, productive, admired, or perfect. At 60, what matters isn't what you do, but how you feel while doing it. It's the intention behind the action. It's the soul behind the word.
You begin to see that many of your greatest lessons came through pain, not from the pain itself, but from how you moved through it, from the choices you made while still wounded, from the moments you stayed silent when everything inside you screamed, from the boundaries you set after giving in for so long. This unseen strength is what carries you now. It doesn't show up in diplomas or public praise, but in the way you rise each morning, in how you look at the people you love, and in the quiet forgiveness you give without drama. As the soul matures, it learns to trust not others, but itself. It begins to recognize signs it once overlooked. It feels the body with greater awareness and honors its natural rhythms. It knows when to speak and when to remain silent. even if the lips tremble. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is what remains when the outer layers fall away. It is what blooms when the shell breaks open. It is what lives when you choose, without fear, to be yourself. Jung said, "The second half of life is not about conquest, but about integration." It's the time when all the parts once separated begin to come together. The forgotten feminine, the suppressed masculine, the wounded child, the wise elder. These parts meet, look into each other's eyes, and recognize themselves. From this meeting, a new kind of strength is born. Not one that dominates, but one that sustains, holds, and remains. A strength that needs no spotlight, because it shines quietly from within. This is the strength that carries the soul through the years without fading. It asks for little, only truth, only silence, only the courage to never abandon yourself again. There comes a moment when everything falls into place, not because the world has changed, but because something within you has finally found peace. At 60, the soul no longer chases speed. It longs for depth. It doesn't need final answers anymore. It seeks presence. It no longer aims to conquer the world, but to find peace within its own body. At this stage, many come to realize that life was never about having, it was about being. Being who you truly are, even if no one understands. Staying true to your own truth, even if it's not always accepted. Being whole, even after being broken 1,000 times. By 60, losses have left their marks, illusions have been tested. The paths have revealed both shortcuts and cliffs. And still, something inside you keeps going, breathes, dreams, and wants to live, not out of duty, but out of joy. This gentle desire to keep going is proof that the soul is alive. Carl Jung saw this phase as the most sacred time, the moment when the ego bows before the soul, when the outer world loses its hold and the inner world becomes a temple, when you learn to walk without carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, when you finally understand that it's okay to rest within yourself. And this resting is not passivity, it's a deep reconciliation with your story, your body, your time, your light, and your shadow. In that stillness, the true meaning of life begins to unfold, not the meaning you were told, but the one you discovered through everything you've lived.